You think you know about Catholic saints, the gentle priest, the kind teacher, the man who helped street kids. But in 1868, on May 3rd, John Bosco woke up screaming. He had just seen something that would haunt him for weeks. Something about the teenage boys under his care. Something about what happens when innocence meets temptation. And what he saw was not gentle at all. A crystal hall, veils covering doorways, each one marked with a sin, but one veil stood out, the sixth commandment. And underneath it, dozens of souls, young souls, teenage boys he knew by name, boys from his oratory in Turin. Not criminals, not monsters, just kids who made one choice, then another, then never turned back. If you value documented history and spiritual truth like this, subscribe. Comment which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched using sources from the biographical memoirs of Saint John Bosco, published between 1898 and 1939, compiled by Father Giovanni Battista Lemoyne, alongside the 40 Dreams manuscript in Salesian Studies Journal, January 2025. Now back to the information. John Bosco was born August 16, 1815 in Becci, a hamlet near Turin in northern Italy. Father dies when John is 2. Mother Margherita raises 3 boys alone. Poverty, child labor, no school. But at 9 years old, John has a dream, a field full of boys, fighting, cursing, blaspheming. Then a man appears, brilliant light, a woman beside him. They tell young John his mission: win these boys not with blows, but with gentleness. Show them sin is ugly and virtue is beautiful. 40 years later, Don Bosco runs the Oratory of St. Francis de Sales. 700 boys, street kids, orphans, factory workers aged 12 to 18. He feeds them, teaches them trades, catechizes them, and he has dreams, prophetic dreams. Dreams where he sees the state of their souls, dreams that come true. Anthony Ferraris, March 1865. Bosco tells the boy he'll die within days. The boy confesses, receives last rites. Dies exactly when Bosco predicted. John Bosco witnesses this under formal oath. States that not one boy died at the oratory without Bosco predicting it first. May 3rd, 1868. Sunday night, Feast of St. Joseph's patronage. Bosco gathers his boys, tells them he has another dream, something that exhausted him, something terrifying. He's been shown hell, not metaphorical hell, actual hell, the place where souls go when they die unrepentant. And he's been shown which sins send the most boys there. The dream starts simple. A guide appears, takes Bosco by the hand. They walk through a meadow, then suddenly they're somewhere else. A vast hall of crystal, magnificent, gleaming, but wrong, cold. At regular intervals, veils hang from ceiling to floor. Each veil covers a doorway. Each doorway leads to a chamber. Each chamber is marked with a sin: pride, disobedience, envy, theft, gluttony, sloth, anger. The guide walks Bosco past each one, shows him boys trapped behind each veil. Boys Bosco recognizes, boys from his own oratory, some still alive, some already dead. Then they reach the veil marked 6th commandment. The guide stops, points, says these words: "Transgressions against this commandment cause the eternal ruin of many boys." Ah, Bosco asks the obvious question: did they not go to confession? The guide's answer cuts like ice. They did, but they lied. They confessed 2 times when it was 5. They confessed 3 times when it was 7. They felt shame in childhood and never told the whole truth. They omitted details. They minimized. They went through the motions without true contrition. They entered the confessional planning how to deceive the priest rather than examining their conscience. And now they're here, forever. The guide lifts the veil. Bosco sees inside a group of boys, all from his oratory, all known to him by name, all trapped there because of sins of impurity. Some had fallen once as children, felt too ashamed to confess fully, carried that secret into adolescence, into young adulthood, died without making it right. Others had fallen repeatedly, told themselves it wasn't serious, told themselves everyone does it, told themselves God would understand, but they never truly repented, never truly resolved to stop. And when death came suddenly, an accident, an illness, a moment they didn't expect, they were caught unprepared. Bosco wrote this down, published it, read it aloud to his boys, not to scare them, to save them, because he knew something modern culture tries to forget. Actions have eternal consequences. Choices made at 15 shape destinies at 50. Seeds planted in teenage years bear fruit in adulthood. And what feels like freedom in the moment can become a prison for eternity. 1868. Italy is in upheaval. The Industrial Revolution has pulled families apart. Boys as young as 10 work 14-hour shifts in factories. Streets overflow with orphans, child labor, child poverty, child exploitation. No labor laws, no child protection services, no social safety net. The new secular government has seized church property, suppressed religious orders, pushed God out of public life. Sound familiar? Into this chaos walks Don Bosco. He sees boys sleeping in alleys, picking pockets to survive. getting dragged into adult vices before they understand what they're doing. He opens the oratory, gives them shelter, food, education, job training. But most importantly, he gives them something modern culture has lost: moral clarity, the understanding that some things are genuinely wrong, that purity matters, that chastity isn't oppression but protection. His boys fight spiritual battles, literally. In another dream, Bosco sees them in a field. Monsters attack from all sides: serpents, wolves, bears, dragons. The boys have weapons: two-pronged pitchforks representing confession and communion, swords representing devotion to the Blessed Sacrament and the Virgin Mary, hammers representing frequent confession, knives representing devotion to various saints. The boys who use their weapons survive. The boys who drop their weapons get devoured. But there's a twist. After one battle, the serpent lies dead, strangled by a rosary. Victory. Celebration. Then some boys approach the serpent's corpse. Against Bosco's screaming warnings, they start eating the flesh. "It's delicious!" they shout. Immediately they collapse. Bodies swell, harden like stone, poisoned. The guide tells Bosco, the sensual man does not perceive the things that are of God. Translation: pleasure blinds people to danger. What tastes good now kills you later. Bosco asks how to save them. The guide answers, anvil and hammer. Bosco takes each poisoned boy, places him on an anvil, strikes him with a hammer. The blow is violent, painful, but it works. The poison breaks. The boy wakes. The hammer is confession. The anvil is communion. Pain followed by healing. Death followed by resurrection. This is the pattern. Now fast forward. 21st century. The world has changed. Italy 1868 versus your city today. Different technology, different politics, different entertainment, but the same spiritual warfare, the same serpent, the same poison, just new packaging. 1868, boys exposed to vice through street encounters, taverns, adult workers who teach them things they shouldn't know. 2025, boys exposed to vice through smartphones, infinite pornography, social media, streaming platforms, dating apps that facilitate casual encounters with zero accountability. 1868, a boy meets a girl at a town festival. Maybe they hold hands, maybe they sneak a kiss, maybe they go too far, and now they're in confession the next week, wrestling with guilt. 2025, a teenager swipes right, messages for an hour, meets up that night and has access to birth control, abortion, and a culture that tells them this is completely normal, even healthy, even empowering. The speed has changed, the scale has changed, the cultural messaging has changed, but the spiritual stakes, identical. The dream Don Bosco had about the sixth commandment wasn't about Victorian prudishness, it was about eternal destiny, about souls hanging in the balance, about choices made in private that echo in eternity. Here's what the dream reveals. The boys in hell didn't get there because they fell once. They got there because they never truly repented. They went through religious motions while internally justifying their behavior. They confessed with their mouths while planning to repeat the sin in their hearts. They said, "I'm sorry," to God, while telling themselves, but it's not really that bad. This is the trap. Modern dating culture accelerates this trap. When you're 15 or 16 or 17 and your boyfriend or girlfriend suggests spending the night, whether at their house or yours, or a friend's empty place, you're not equipped to handle that. Your brain isn't fully developed. Your prefrontal cortex, the part that handles long-term consequences and impulse control, won't finish developing until you're 25. You're running on emotions, hormones, and whatever cultural messages you've absorbed from media and peers. And the culture lies to you. It tells you sex is just physical, just pleasure, just self-expression, just two people doing what feels good. It strips away the spiritual dimension entirely. It pretends there's no such thing as objective morality. It mocks the idea of sin. It redefines freedom as doing whatever you want, rather than having the power to do what's right. But Don Bosco saw the truth. In his dreams, he saw boys who believed the cultural lies, boys who thought they were free but were actually enslaved, boys who thought they were just having fun but were actually ingesting poison, boys who thought they could compartmentalize their sexual behavior from their spiritual life but discovered too late that you can't. Another dream, 1868. Bosco sees a road, boys running down it, excited, laughing, having fun. Then the road splits into countless smaller paths. Each path has traps hidden along it, snares, nets, pits. The three most dangerous traps are labeled pride, disobedience, and impurity. These three are linked together, and they catch more boys than all the others combined. But here's the key detail. Next to each trap, God has placed tools, swords, hammers, knives, ways to cut yourself free. The bigger swords represent meditation and spiritual reading. The hammers represent confession. The knives represent devotion to saints. If a boy falls into a trap but immediately uses the tools, he escapes. If he falls into a trap and just lies there, or worse, if he falls in and tells himself, This trap isn't so bad, actually. Then he stays caught, and staying caught long enough becomes permanent. The modern equivalent is crystal clear. Teenager starts dating. Physical boundaries get pushed. Hand-holding becomes making out becomes more. And at each stage, there's a moment to cut yourself free. Call someone, go to confession, set firm boundaries, use the tools, or tell yourself lies. We're in love. Everyone's doing it. My parents are too strict. Every one of these is lying in the trap saying it's comfortable. Don Bosco saw where that road leads. In his hell dream, he sees the walls of the outer rim of hell. His guide explains, there are 1,000 walls between where they're standing and the real fire. Each wall is 1,000 measures thick. Each measure is 1,000 miles. They're millions of miles from hell's core. This is just the outermost edge. The guide forces Bosco to touch the first wall. For one instant, Bosco's hand burns. The pain is unbearable. And the guide says, if this is what the first wall feels like, imagine the 1,000th. Bosco wakes up. His hand actually hurts, the physical pain from a spiritual experience. He's so disturbed he can barely speak for days. When he finally tells his boys, several of them immediately go to confession. Several change their behavior overnight. Several who were hiding sins come clean. The dream works, because it's true. Now consider the modern teenager. You're at your boyfriend's house, or your girlfriend's house. Parents aren't home. Or parents don't care. Or parents actively enable it because they think it's healthier than sneaking around. You're in the bedroom, door closed, expectations are clear, and in that moment, you have a choice. Use the tools God has given you. Set a boundary. Leave the room. Call someone. Pray. Remember that you're not just a body, you're a soul. An immortal soul that will exist forever in either heaven or hell, based partly on choices you make right now. Or ignore all that. Tell yourself it doesn't matter. Tell yourself the church is wrong. Tell yourself pleasure now is worth risk later. Tell yourself you'll deal with consequences if they come, and then discover, like the boys in Bosco's dream, that the consequences are real. The poison is real, the trap is real, and the walls of hell are very, very real. Here's another layer. Bosco also saw that sins of impurity are rarely isolated. They connect to pride and disobedience. Pride says, I know better than God, better than my parents, better than the church, better than centuries of moral teaching. Disobedience says, I'm going to do what I want, regardless of what authority figures tell me. And impurity says, my pleasure matters more than my purity. These three form a triangle. And once you're caught in that triangle, escape becomes exponentially harder. The teenager who sneaks out to spend the night with their boyfriend isn't just committing one sin. They're lying to their parents, disobeying house rules, breaking trust, putting themselves in temptation's path, collaborating with another person to create an occasion of sin. And if things go where they're likely to go, they're committing sins of impurity, then they come home and lie about where they were. Then they go to school and maybe brag about it to friends or lie to hide it. Then they skip confession or go to confession and lie there too. Layer upon layer upon layer. And each layer makes the next easier. This is how traps work. The first time you lie to your parents, you feel terrible. The 10th time, it's routine. The first time you cross a physical boundary, alarm bells ring in your conscience. The 10th time, you've learned to silence those bells. The first time you receive communion in mortal sin, you feel unworthy. The 10th time, you've convinced yourself God doesn't care or doesn't exist or is too loving to judge. This is the poisoned meat. This is the serpent's flesh that tastes delicious going down but hardens your heart into stone. Bosco would tell his boys 3 things you must do to stay free. Frequent confession. At least monthly, preferably weekly. Honest confession. Don't minimize, don't omit, don't lie. Tell the whole truth even when it's humiliating. Frequent communion. Receive Jesus in the Eucharist as often as your state allows. If you're in mortal sin, confess first. But if you're in a state of grace, receive often. This is the food that strengthens you for battle. And devotion to Mary, pray the rosary daily. Ask the Mother of God to protect your purity. She will. These aren't arbitrary religious obligations. They're the swords and hammers from the dream. They're the tools God places next to the traps. And they work. Bosco saw boys transform. Teenage boys who were caught in habitual sin break free through these practices. He also saw boys who ignored these practices and ended up destroyed. One more dream detail matters here. In the hell vision, Bosco asks why boys who went to confession still ended up damned. The answer? Incomplete confession. They confessed some sins, but not others. They confessed the sin, but not the frequency. They said words of contrition without actual contrition. They had no firm purpose of amendment. They planned to repeat the sin even as they confessed it. This is sacrilege. This makes things worse, not better. Better to not go to confession at all than to go and lie. So if you're a teenager reading this, or a parent of a teenager, or someone who remembers being a teenager and making these choices, here's the application. The culture will tell you that sexual activity before marriage, even in your teens, is normal and healthy. The culture will tell you that spending the night with your boyfriend or girlfriend is a natural progression of a relationship. The culture will tell you that as long as you're safe and consenting, there's no moral dimension to consider. Don Bosco, speaking from his visions of heaven and hell, speaking from his experience with 700 teenage boys, speaking from his mystical encounters with God, would tell you the culture is lying. He would tell you that what happens in that bedroom has eternal consequences. He would tell you that the pleasure is temporary, but the spiritual damage can be permanent. He would tell you that you're not just risking pregnancy or disease, though those are real risks, you're risking your immortal soul. And he would tell you there's hope, always hope. The boys who ate the serpent's flesh didn't stay poisoned. Bosco used the hammer and anvil, confession and communion. It was violent, it was painful, it broke them open, but it saved them. If you're already caught in this trap, you can get out. Confess fully, confess honestly, make a firm purpose of amendment, receive absolution, receive communion, cut off the relationship if necessary. Delete the apps, change your friend group, move your bedroom door, whatever it takes, use the tools. If you're not caught yet, but you're heading toward the trap, change course now. Break up with the boyfriend who's pressuring you. Stop going to the girlfriend's house when parents aren't home. Set clear boundaries and enforce them. If the other person won't respect your boundaries, end it. A relationship that requires you to compromise your eternal soul is not a relationship worth having. If you're a parent, have the conversation, not the sanitized health class conversation, the eternal destiny conversation. Your teenager needs to know that their choices in this area have consequences that extend beyond this life. They need to know that the culture is actively lying to them. They need to know that you'll support them in making hard choices. They need to know that if they've already fallen, confession is available and healing is possible. Don Bosco founded the Salesian Order. At his death, 250 homes with 130,000 children. Over 6,000 became priests, second largest religious order in the Catholic Church. His method worked. Gentleness, charity, clear moral teaching, frequent sacraments, prophetic dreams that showed the stakes. Well, one biography detail matters. Bosco maintained such devotion to chastity, he barely said the word. Feared that speaking impurity might create impure images. That protective of souls, that careful with innocence. Opposite of modern sex education, describing everything graphically. Bosco also predicted boys' deaths, not as curses, but warnings. Boy living carelessly, Bosco says you'll die within a month. Go to confession, get right with God. Boy laughs, gets sick. Facing death, takes it seriously, makes full confession, receives last rites. Dies in grace. Bosco attends the funeral, tells other boys, "This is why I push confession and communion." You don't know when your time comes. No ready, no second chance. Your teenager doesn't know when time comes either. Could live to 90, could die at 17. Car crash, aneurysm, cancer, life fragile, life uncertain. Every person faces judgment. What happens in that bedroom matters for eternity. Not because God is cosmic policeman, but because every choice moves us toward God or away, opens hearts to grace or closes them. Sexual sin in adolescence carves grooves in the soul, very difficult to smooth later. Adults struggling with pornography addiction trace it to teen exposure. Adults with serial relationships trace it to early sexual activity, teaching them relationships are about physical pleasure. Adults with multiple abortions trace it to first unplanned high school pregnancy. Adults in third marriages trace it to teenage patterns. Bosco saw this clearly in the dreams, early choices, late consequences, running through decades, through lifetimes, through eternities. The adults who struggle with pornography addiction often trace it back to first exposure in their teens. The adults who have serial relationships and can't commit often trace it back to early sexual activity that taught them relationships are primarily about physical pleasure. The adults who've had multiple abortions often trace it back to that first unplanned pregnancy in high school. The adults in their third marriage often trace it back to patterns established as teenagers. Bosco saw this. The dreams showed him the long arc, early choices, late consequences. Here's the final piece. In May 1862, Bosco had his most famous dream, the two columns. He saw a massive ship on a stormy sea, enemy ships attacking from all sides. The ship represented the Catholic Church. The enemies represented the forces of secularism, modernism, atheism attacking the faith. In the middle of the sea, two enormous columns rise, one topped with a statue of the Eucharist, one topped with a statue of Mary. The ship's captain, the Pope, tries to steer toward the columns. Multiple popes die in the attempt. Finally, one succeeds. He moors the ship between the two columns. The storm calms. The enemies flee. The church survives. The message, the Eucharist and devotion to Mary will save the church through its darkest trials. Not programs, not politics, not clever apologetics, sacraments and prayer. This applies to individual souls too. Your teenager survives the storm by clinging to the Eucharist and praying to Mary. They don't need better arguments against hookup culture. They need supernatural grace. They don't need to win debates with their peers about sexual morality. They need the actual presence of Christ in their souls, strengthening them to resist temptation. Bosco's dreams show this over and over. Boys fighting monsters don't win through human strength. They win through sacramental weapons. The confession that breaks the poison, the communion that revives the dead, the rosary that strangles the serpent, the devotion to saints that provides the knives. It's all supernatural. It all requires faith. It all requires submission to God's plan rather than assertion of autonomous will. So when your teenager wants to sleep over at their boyfriend's house or girlfriend's house, the answer is no. And not because you're mean, not because you're controlling, not because you don't trust them, but because you love them too much to let them walk into a trap. Because you've read Bosco's dreams. Because you understand the stakes. Because you know that what looks like teenage fun can become eternal poison. And if they push back, if they say everyone else is allowed, you tell them about the boys in Bosco's dream who said the serpent's flesh is delicious. You tell them about the traps on the road. You tell them about the crystal hall with veils covering doorways to hell. You tell them about the sixth commandment and the souls lost there. You tell them about the first wall of hell burning a saint's hand in a dream. You tell them the truth. Then you give them the tools. Set up regular confession. Make sure they're receiving communion frequently. Give them a rosary. Teach them to pray it. Introduce them to the saints. Create a home environment where purity is valued, not mocked. Model it yourself. If you're cohabiting unmarried, that ends. If you're using contraception, that ends. If you're viewing pornography, that ends. You can't call your teenager to a standard you're not living. Bosco's final words on his deathbed, January 31st, 1888, were about the Eucharist and Mary. His whole life pointed toward these two anchors. 72 years of ministry, hundreds of dreams, thousands of souls saved. It all came down to Christ and his mother. Not complicated, not sophisticated, just true. The dream about the sixth commandment wasn't the longest dream Bosco had. It wasn't the most elaborate, but it might be the most urgent for our time, because we live in a culture that has completely lost its understanding of sexual morality, that treats teenagers' bodies as autonomous zones where parents shouldn't interfere, that celebrates casual sex as liberation, that mocks virginity as prudish, that pushes contraception and abortion as solutions to the consequences of bad choices. And into this culture, Bosco's dream speaks a hard word. Many souls are lost here. Many teenage boys and girls end up in hell because of sins in this area, not because sex is bad. Within marriage, it's a sacred gift, but because sex outside marriage, especially in adolescence before emotional maturity and life commitment, damages souls in ways that can become permanent, creates bonds that get broken, creates expectations that can't be met, creates habits that enslave. The teenager sleeping over at their boyfriend's house isn't just breaking a parent's rule. They're not just being rebellious. They're not just having fun. They're standing at a crossroads. One path leads to purity, to sacraments, to struggle, but also to grace, and ultimately to heaven. The other path leads to compromise, to justification, to repeated sin without repentance, and potentially to hell. The choice made in that bedroom echoes in eternity. Bosco saw this with mystical clarity. We should listen. We should act. We should protect our children. We should call them to the higher standard. We should give them the sacramental weapons. And we should pray. Pray like Bosco prayed. Pray for protection. Pray for purity. Pray for the grace to say no when the culture screams yes. Pray for the courage to use the hammer and anvil when we've fallen. Pray for the wisdom to see the trap before we step in it, because the serpent is still there. The flesh still looks delicious. The poison still tastes sweet. But now you know. Now you've heard what Don Bosco saw. Now you understand the stakes. What you do with that knowledge is up to you. Choose the tools. Choose the sacraments. Choose purity. Choose life. The crystal hall awaits those who choose otherwise, and the walls of hell are very real. Let me tell you about the boys who got out, because this story isn't just doom, it's not just hell and punishment and fear. Bosco saw both sides, the boys who fell and stayed down, and the boys who fell and got back up. Dominic Savio, born April 2nd, 1842 in the village of Riva near Turin, meets Don Bosco at age 12, small kid, sickly, but spiritually intense, makes a personal commitment to purity on the day of his first communion. Writes it down, I will die rather than commit sin. Not dramatic teenage posturing, actual commitment. He means it. Savio lives at the oratory. Bosco watches him closely. Other boys try to corrupt him, show him obscene images, tell him dirty jokes, invite him to secret meetings where they share pornographic materials smuggled in from outside. This is 1855, no internet, but the same warfare, the same attempts to steal innocence, the same peer pressure weaponized against purity. Savio refuses, not self-righteously, not with condemnation, just firmly. I promised God I wouldn't look at those things. The other boys mock him, call him a child, call him a coward, call him a prude. He doesn't argue, just walks away, spends extra time in prayer instead, goes to confession weekly. receives communion as often as the rules allow, uses the tools. Then, one day, two older boys convince a younger boy, around 10 years old, to come with them behind a shed. They have something to show him, something exciting. Savio sees this happening, recognizes the setup. The older boys are about to expose the younger one to pornographic material. First exposure, gateway. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once the door opens, closing it becomes exponentially harder. Savio intervenes, steps between the older boys and the younger one, says simply, "What you're planning to do is wrong. I won't let you." The older boys are 15, 16, bigger than Savio, stronger. They could beat him up easily. They threaten to. Savio doesn't move, stands his ground, physically blocks their access to the younger boy. Eventually, the older boys back down, storm off angry. The younger boy is saved. Bosco hears about this incident, calls Savio in, asks him why he risked getting beaten up over something that wasn't his business. Savio's answer: "Better they hurt my body than hurt his soul." This is the mindset. This is what purity produces. Not just personal holiness, but active protection of others' innocence. Savio dies March 9th, 1857, not yet 15 years old. Tuberculosis. On his deathbed, he says to Bosco, "What beautiful things I see." Bosco asks what he sees. Savio can't fully explain, just beautiful things. Then he dies. Peaceful, joyful, no fear, no regret. No unconfessed sins haunting him. No hidden shame poisoning his last moments, just beauty. Bosco later has dreams about Savio, sees him in heaven, not just saved, elevated, honored. A teenager who died a virgin in a sexually saturated culture gets crowned with special glory. This matters. The culture tells teenagers that virginity is something to lose, something embarrassing, something that makes you less than. Heaven tells a different story. Heaven values what earth mocks. Fast forward to 1868. 11 years after Savio's death, Bosco has the hell dream, sees the crystal hall, sees the veils, sees the boys trapped behind the sixth commandment veil. And notably, Savio is not among them. The boy who protected his purity at all costs is nowhere near that chamber. The connection is obvious. The choices Savio made at 12, 13, 14 directly determined where he spent eternity. Now consider the counterfactual. What if Savio had compromised? He still might have died at 14, but his deathbed would have been different. Instead of peace, panic. This is the crux. You don't know when your time comes. Savio kept his soul ready. When death came, he was prepared. Bosco saw this gamble fail. Boys died suddenly, accidents, illnesses, violence. Turin was dangerous. Every sudden death was a final exam with no makeups. Die in mortal sin, that's it. No second chance. Modern teenagers face the same risk: car crashes, overdoses, suicides, medical conditions. Sometimes with warnings, sometimes without. Go to sleep in mortal sin, you might wake up in hell. Here's what culture teaches. Sex is just physical. Restricting it is repressive. Let teenagers explore. Here's what Bosco's dreams teach. Sex creates soul ties. Using it outside marriage fragments the soul. Teenagers need protection, not permission. The culture's approach has been tested. Teenage pregnancy declined through contraception and abortion. But STDs are skyrocketing. Mental health is in crisis. Pornography addiction is ubiquitous. Hookup culture created a generation unable to form stable relationships. This is sexual liberation's fruit. Bosco's approach also proved itself. Boys who followed his system, frequent confession, communion, devotion to Mary, clear boundaries, became stable adults, priests, fathers, husbands. The Salesians educated millions. Different methods, different fruits. Now let's address the hard objection. What about love? What about teenage couples who genuinely care for each other? What about the boyfriend and girlfriend who have been together for 2 years, who plan to marry eventually, who see physical intimacy as a natural expression of their emotional bond? Isn't it unrealistic and even cruel to expect them to abstain? Bosco would answer, yes, unrealistic without supernatural grace. That's why they need sacraments. Love wills the good of the other. True love wants their eternal salvation. If physical intimacy before marriage puts salvation at risk, and Bosco's dreams say it does, then true love abstains. Moreover, most teenage relationships don't end in marriage. The person you date at 16 probably isn't who you'll marry. Physical intimacy creates a soul bond that later gets ripped apart. Every breakup after intimacy leaves scar tissue. Accumulate enough, and you damage your bonding capacity permanently. This is what Bosco saw. Boys who had multiple partners before marriage struggled with fidelity, pattern set, bonding mechanism broken. They trained themselves to see people as pleasure sources. They'd learned to take rather than give. Carried this into marriages, into parenting. Poison spread through generations. Alternative, purity. Save yourself for marriage. Not because sex is bad, in marriage it's sacred, but because sex outside marriage, especially in adolescence, damages souls permanently. creates bonds that break, creates habits that enslave. And if you've already failed, if you've crossed lines, if you've slept over, if you've eaten the serpent's flesh, there's hope. The hammer and anvil. Poisoned boys were dying. The hammer broke them open. The anvil held them. They revived. Confession is violent, humiliating. Exposing sins to a priest breaks you open. But that's the point. You need breaking so poison drains. You need violence of contrition so hardened heart softens. On the other side of honest, contrite confession, you find resurrection, then communion. Receive Jesus. Let the Eucharist heal what confession has opened. Let Christ's presence fortify you against the next temptation. Bosco proved this thousands of times. Boys trapped in habitual sin broke free through this pattern. Confess honestly. Receive communion frequently. Pray daily. Avoid occasions of sin. The pattern works. One final dream. Road to hell. Wide road. Smooth, crowded. Boys running, laughing. Don't see traps. Hidden, disguised. Path looks safe. Every few steps another trap. Boy falls. Friends don't notice. Keep running. Boy in trap either uses tools to escape or stays. Stay long enough becomes permanent. Dragged into the pit. Into hell. The modern translation, the wide road is culture. Do what feels good. Follow your heart. Everyone's doing it. This road is crowded, celebrated. Music, movies, TV, social media, peers. Everyone pushing you down this path. The traps are hidden. Look like opportunities. Like freedom. The trap of sleeping over doesn't announce itself. Comes disguised as love, as trust. Your boyfriend says, if you love me, you'd stay. Culture says, you're almost an adult. Trap snaps shut. Then two options. Use the tools. Say no. Risk mockery. Risk rejection. Cut yourself free. Step off the wide road onto the narrow one. Or stay in the trap. Justify it. Stay comfortable. Watch the trap solidify until escape becomes impossible. Bosco saw both outcomes. Boys who escaped at the last second. Boys who stayed trapped until death. The difference wasn't intelligence or class. The difference was willingness to use the tools. Humility to admit, I'm trapped and need help, versus pride saying I'm fine. Teenage years form you. Habits built from 13 to 19 shape the adult you become. Build habits of purity, prayer, and sacramental life. Become an adult capable of fidelity and holiness. Build habits of sexual experimentation and moral relativism. Become an adult trapped in broken relationships and spiritual emptiness. Cause and effect. What Bosco witnessed over 40 years with thousands of boys. The sleepover question extends beyond one night. It's about trajectory, about soul formation, about becoming someone who resists or embraces temptation. That one night is a referendum on who you're becoming. Final revelation from Bosco's dreams. Boys in hell don't go there primarily because of what they did. They go there because they refuse to confess fully, repent truly, amend their lives. They committed sin, then hid it, justified it, repeated it, received communion unworthily, died suddenly, layer upon layer. Each layer made genuine repentance harder. Serpent's flesh analogy. You don't die from the first bite. Tastes good. Seems fine. But poison works. More you eat, more your discernment clouds. Conscience sears. Capacity for grace diminishes. Until you're so poisoned you can't recognize you're dying. You think you're fine, but you're hardening into stone. Teenager sleeping over at boyfriend's house doesn't recognize danger, doesn't feel like sin. Experiences pleasure and excitement. Warning signs are subtle. Unease during prayer. Reluctance to confess. Defensive reactions. Anger toward boundaries. Drifting from church. Easy to miss. Easy to ignore. By the time symptoms become obvious, relationship ends badly, pregnancy, STDs, depression, damaged bonding capacity, poison has progressed far. Not irreversible while alive, but harder to treat, more painful to extract. Prevention is crucial. The word no to a sleepover is critical. Bosco's legacy lives. 250 homes became thousands. The Salesian Order operates in over 130 countries. Schools, youth centers, orphanages, training programs, all built on Bosco's vision. Save the young with spiritual tools, moral clarity, practical skills, unconditional love. Because human nature hasn't changed. Technology changes, culture changes, but the spiritual warfare Bosco saw in his dreams is identical to the warfare teenagers face today. The serpent uses different disguises, but remains the same serpent. The traps use different bait, but remain the same traps. And the narrow road still requires the same tools: confession, communion, prayer, purity, devotion to Mary. You have a choice. Believe the culture or believe Bosco. Follow the crowd down the wide road or take the narrow path. Say yes to the sleepover invitation or say no. The choice seems small. The consequences are eternal. The crystal hall waits for those who refuse. The veils cover doorways to eternal chambers. The sixth commandment veil has claimed many teenage souls, but it doesn't have to claim yours. The tools are available. The grace is offered. Choose Christ, choose purity, choose life. Don Bosco's dreams prove what's at stake.